Hello everyone, I'm Daniel, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about my experiences playing the Feast of Hemlock Vale, the campaign. I actually went through the entire campaign with a couple of my friends, and we played Hank Sampson, Kate Winthrop, and I was Wilson Richards. So it was a 3-player game with standard difficulty. So everything I talk about is colored by exactly that experience. We did not play every scenario. We played 6 of the 8 scenarios. The 2 scenarios we did not play were the Thing in the Depths and Written in Rock. So I have no idea about these 2 scenarios, and I won't be talking about them. I actually won't be talking about the scenarios in general in this video. I'm just going to be trying to make this as spoiler-free as possible. However, I'm going to talk about what I thought about the campaign and its structure in particular. So if you don't want to know anything, then this is not the video for you. But I will, before you leave, let you know that I really love this campaign. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot going on, and I think it is a clear winner, a clear recommendation for the new design team, as well as the new style of release where everything comes in the same box. This is the 3rd campaign after Edge of the Earth and the Scarlet Keys, where all the scenarios come in one box, which allows for a certain amount of non-linearity in the scenarios. And this, in my opinion, was the best version of that we've seen so far. Okay, so I've got a couple things that I really want to talk about, and I'm going to start right off with this idea of world building. The world building in this campaign is fantastic. So, as you may know, in this campaign, it takes place on the island of Hemlock. And there's a lot of locations in this map that you are given. And the way the campaign is structured is you get to go to a number of them throughout the 3-day and 3-night campaign structure. The map itself is not particularly important. It's nice to have it, but it's not like in the Scarlet Keys where you really have to worry about time. So one of the big highlights to me for this particular campaign is the way this day-night structure works. So right here at the beginning of the campaign guide tells us that these are the different scenarios that you will play, and you will only play 6 of them. There's 8 possible scenarios, and you only get to play 6. How does this work? Well, you can kind of get this from the table of contents here, but there are 5 different scenarios that you can choose to play kind of whenever you want during either the day or the night of those first 3 days. There are some exceptions there. Then there's a couple of either mandatory or story-related time points when you can play the other 3 scenarios. So big thumbs up for the replayability for this campaign. There's a lot of things that you can do that I didn't see. Not just playing different scenarios that I didn't see at all, but rather the same scenarios that I did see, you can see them during a different time of day or a different day altogether. A lot of setup instructions say something about either certain things go into play or certain things don't go into play depending on which day or night it is. But you don't need to keep track of this very much. You just need to know which day you're on and which time of day it is. You don't need to think about, do I have time to do all the things I want to do? You get to play 6 scenarios. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, unlike the Scarlet Keys where you had to figure out your optimum pathway to get through different locations and not waste time in the process. There's nothing like that in this campaign. Instead, and I want to show off some of the excellent art here too, you have day 1 and some encounter cards that you're not going to look at here, but you can see the art that are only used during day 1 and night 1. You have, on the other side, night 1. Very cool. Then there is day 2 and night 2. And there's some encounter cards that are only played during the day or night on day 3. And then there is night 3. Okay. So don't look at those too much because there's a little story to be told, but putting them all together is really cool. Gives you a little triptych of sorts. The same for the day side. So there is a very cool story, in my opinion, to be told, and I will not share about what that is. And then here are the day 3 cards. But that's basically it as far as the day and night with the choice of what scenarios to play. Daytime and nighttime does have a ramifications during the scenarios, and some of them more than others. But I want to go back to this idea of world building. You're always in this location, always in Hemlock, and it feels like a lived-in place. I was talking to some of my friends about this who played the campaign with me, and we really felt like there was a lot to learn about the location and the people who live there. But more than that, whether or not we were participating in some of the NPCs' storylines, their stories were going on without us, which was really cool because later on we saw some ramifications of not doing things with them. And I don't want to say too much about that, but I can go back and replay this whole campaign, choosing some different options and seeing what would happen if I had followed their stories or done something with them during some of the scenarios or some of these interludes that we'll talk about in a second. So I thought that was neat. It was like time marches on whether or not we are participating in their part of the story. So it felt real. It felt like I was actually in Hemlock Island with them, Hemlock Vale, participating in this feast. And there's a lot of these residents. And that comes, I think, with the whole idea of world building. So there's a number of residents that go into your campaign log and you make some notes about them. And they all have something going on. And you'll notice with some of them, as you can see here with Gideon, they have some ability. They don't have a cost. These do not go into your deck ever. But they do come into play for various reasons. And they all have some kind of a way of parlaying with them. It lets you look at the codex. That's what that little icon means there. It says read codex number 6. And this means in the campaign log, there is a section, take away all of our residents. Again, there's a lot of them, and they show up. Some of them show up periodically, some of them less so. But in the campaign guide, there's this codex. And it just means read something about that person. So you can see here for Gideon, again, don't read it too carefully, but you read a little bit about his story, about you talking with him. Often it tells you to increase their relationship level, and that's going to be something based in the back of the campaign guide. You write something in their notes, you increase their relationship level, and that has ramifications later. Sometimes you get experience points as well. So there's not much more to say about that other than it's really cool that these guys are around throughout all the scenarios. Not every scenario, but a lot of them. And you can come check in on them often. This feels a little bit like Edge of the Earth, where you have the partners and they have a little story that's going on too. But the difference to me is that this is more successful because they aren't with you all the time. And it feels like you are not the main character in this story. You are not the one driving a lot of the stuff that's happening in the Feast of Hemlock Vale. Yes, you have a part to play. Yes, you are involved. You're not just there watching and listening and investigating, but it does not feel like you and these NPCs have, like, they're not there along for the ride. You are basically along for the ride with what's going on with them. So it felt like a real video game where, you know, their stories are being told and you're kind of catching up with them and seeing what's going on. Again, like I said before, whether you were there or not, their stories continue. For Edge of the Earth, that didn't really happen, right? Again, I don't want to spoil that campaign if you haven't played it, but there's a lot of story stuff with the partners, but they feel like they're mostly there to give you some bonus while you're playing the scenarios. These guys, it feels more like their story is more important and their the ramifications on the scenarios themselves. So that's a huge win for me. I really felt like I was living in this world, and the world itself was so dynamic. The other part of the reason why I think this world is so rich is not only do you have all of these locations that you go to in the map, but there is a location for Hemlock Vale itself that shows up time and time again. Again, I don't want to talk too much about the preludes here right now. Maybe I'll talk about it towards the end. But this is a location with these locations that you're revisiting often. And it almost feels like, going back to the video game analogy, like a hub world. Like you're starting all of the other scenarios by coming here first, doing something or another, and then going off on your your bigger level or scenario or adventure. But you get to know these places, and it's not the same every time you go back, which I think is neat. It's a rich design space too. It's not just reusing the map like in Age of the Earth, reuse the map 3 scenarios in a row at the beginning. Although I like that too. It feels like you're there not just to play a scenario, you're there because you are in HEMLOCK VALE. I don't want to say too much more, but it worked for me. Often people are going to ask on comparisons with Edge of the Earth and with Scarlet Keys, is there a lot of reading? And I mentioned kind of about the Codex has a lot of things to read, but you don't read that many of these things. And in my experience with this campaign so far, there's a lot of little things to read. So there's 72 pages in the book, including the back. Yeah, 72 pages here. But you never really had to read too much to set up scenarios, and you never had to read too much at the end of scenarios. There's just these Codex entries to read in every single scenario, of course, if you so choose, that moves things along a little bit. But it honestly didn't feel like that much, and you can only ever read a few of them per scenario. Okay, I think I covered the art. I think the art is fantastic. Maybe it's mostly because of these cards. I think they're really neat, but a lot of the art is really neat and maybe kind of gruesome in some cases. There's a lot with this day and night business. One scenario that I've seen in particular changes the art of enemies based on if it's daytime or nighttime. I don't want to spoil those things for you in terms of what they look like, but I thought that was really neat. So maybe the last thing to talk about is the difficulty. Overall, I didn't think the difficulty was so tough, but there were a few hard scenarios. So we're all quite experienced Arkham players. Of the 6 scenarios we played, we did not successfully complete 2 of them. It's difficult to evaluate difficulty on a first run. I know many people only play once, but again, 3-player standard difficulty, it seemed about right. We 100%ed, I think, all the rest of the scenarios, or maybe not 100%, but something close. And then the 2 that we didn't do well on, they were a little bit more challenging, and we didn't know what was coming, so it's a little bit hard to evaluate based on just one run through. But I thought it was fine on standard difficulty. It didn't seem too easy, and it didn't seem overly punishing without having preparation. And that end, are there any characters or investigators that are extra good or extra bad in this campaign? Hard to say. I think the answer is no. There's one exception in the back of the campaign guide. There is a achievement. I won't show you the whole thing for the campaign guide, but there's an achievements list back here. And one of them is to complete the campaign using Patrice Hathaway. And I think that is fair. There's a few encounter cards and a few other things that happen that probably hit Patrice more than other investigators. There is, again, maybe a mechanic in a theme, if you will, maybe not a new mechanic, but a theme in the encounter cards, especially towards the end, that I don't want to say what it is, but if you can guess, it is something to do with what Patrice may or may not like. So that's okay. I mean, I think for one investigator in particular being tricky, I think you can bring whoever else you want and just make sure your team is somewhat balanced overall. But I don't think there's a, always bring 5 stat investigators or make sure you have high willpower or anything like that. I think all of the stats are tested quite a bit, even on the encounter cards. So that's something to look out for. I didn't think that the encounter sets were overall difficult. There weren't too many that were so tricky. They seemed fairly standard and even to me. A couple of really difficult ones throughout the last part of the campaign, though, but that's just to be expected. I did think there was a pretty neat way of increasing the difficulty for day 2 and day 3, not just with the encounter cards that I showed you before, which is definitely part of it, but there was something else that I don't want to spoil for you, which I thought was quite clever. So that's about it as far as my initial thoughts. I do want to sort of briefly mention that the Prelude situation is going to be a bit divisive, I think. So, as you saw from the rules and the table contents, there are 3 preludes, and there's actually sort of a 4th one, that occur before the main scenarios that you play. And they give you sort of a different way of beginning a scenario. You play this, I would say, an interlude, really. And, well, it's like a playable interlude. You use your cards, you use the chaos bag, but it's not particularly interesting on replays. I think there's still something to do, but it feels like you are setting up a scenario and then tearing it down without actually really playing much. I don't want to give you any more beyond that. The preludes do have some cool rules, I think, about how they interact with the next scenario, but yeah, that's probably all I can say. It may just be divisive in the fact that it's extra stuff and extra time to set up and break down without really playing a real scenario. But you have to do them. It's not like interludes where you can just sort of skim text and just, you know, read through. You really have to play them each time. So that may be the only thing. I enjoyed them because they added to the world building, honestly. Again, on the first playthrough, it felt good. It felt like, okay, I want to figure out how I can do what I want to do during the prelude and set myself up for the next scenario. I don't think I'm going to give you any more spoilers. I hope I've not spoiled things for you during this video too much. I will be talking more about the scenarios in the future. I do want to talk about my Wilson Richards deck, and that will probably happen tomorrow, and I'll tell you how it went without talking about spoilers of the campaign itself. But just again, to sum up, my thoughts on this campaign are very, very positive. I think this is one of the top campaigns that you can get in Arkham Horror, the card game, and the replayability, which I've talked about so much on my channel, is huge. I'm really interested to play it again, but I also felt like the theme and the experience were better than probably most of the other campaigns, honestly, where the Scarlet Keys felt like there's a bunch of disjointed scenarios that are just quite different from each other. Nothing bad about that. I liked the scenarios quite a bit, but there wasn't a whole lot of connective tissue. Here in the Feast of HEMLOCK VALE, I feel like not necessarily the scenarios themselves connect to each other, but all the stuff in between the scenarios connects to those scenarios really, really well. And then all of the consequences do, you know, come back towards the end. If I had any criticisms at this point, again, hard to say on one playthrough, I kind of wish the relationship levels for the residents was a little bit more dynamic. It's mostly a spend more time with them, you get increased relationship levels, and that does matter. But it really doesn't encourage you to spend time with lots of different residents. You kind of are going to pick your favorite few and go down their path, which, you know, again, makes sense because that's how you find out more about all of their stories. But I kind of wish there was multiple paths for how you want to deal with the residents, not just multiple paths of which residents you want to deal with. That said, I might be missing something on some of the residents in that respect. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back tomorrow to talk about my Wilson Richards deck, and I hope that you've gotten this campaign and you're starting to play with your group as well, and enjoy.